Hello everyone, welcome back. I hope your day is starting off just great. Let me introduce the video here with this beautiful picture behind me. Paul posted it on the I Choose Canada group site, and it's the first snowfall in Cambridge, Ontario. The topic for this video is just a simple question. I'll ask it and look forward to your comments in the comments section of what you think, and I'll give you my perspective. And the question is, will the U.S. Supreme Court save Canada? Will the U.S. Supreme Court rule against the U.S. administration and say these tariffs are illegal and so they have to be removed and the money that's been collected has to be paid back, and then the whole world can enjoy freer trade once again? And you can find a lot of stories that are very optimistic about what's going to happen, like this one on CBC. Good chance Trump's tariffs will be struck down by U.S. Supreme Court, says a former U.S. trade representative. Then there are articles like this one posted by ASI Central that details and discusses some of the arguments that lawyers have made in front of the Supreme Court. And this article was posted on November 6th and details that on Wednesday, the court heard a pivotal case to determine whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEEPA, authorizes the Trump administration to issue tariffs, notably the initial 10% base tariff and the targeted reciprocal tariffs and the trafficked tariffs designed to stop alleged flow of illegal drugs into the United States. And this International Emergencies Economic Powers Act was the law that Donald Trump used to impose tariffs on the imports from Canada. Now, I'm not going to go through the details of everything that was discussed in this Supreme Court hearing, but some of the topics and some of the arguments that were put forward are just mind-bogglingly, shockingly stupid, in my opinion. One exchange that went on for a long time had the lead lawyer representing the U.S. administration arguing back and forth with Supreme Court members. They were arguing and presenting different opinions on whether the tariffs were truly a tax and whether that tax was paid by the Americans. And they discussed this seriously at the Supreme Court in the United States. There was a lawyer there trying to convince the judges that it wasn't really clear whether Americans are actually paying a tax at all.
Well, who pays the tariffs? If a tariff is imposed on automobiles, who pays them?
Typically there'd be regardless of who the importer of record is, there'd be a contract that would go along the sort of line of transfer that would allocate the tariff, and there'd be different. Sometimes the foreign producer would pay them. Sometimes the importer would bear the cost. The importer could be an American, could be a foreign company. A lot of times it's a wholly owned American subsidiary of a foreign corporation. So it gets allocated. The empirical estimates range from like 30% to 80% of like how much is borne by American
it's
citizens.
been suggested that the tariffs are responsible for significant reduction in our deficit. I would say that's raising revenue domestically.
There certainly is an incidental and collateral effect of the tariffs, that they do raise revenue, but it's very important that they are regulatory tariffs, not revenue-raising tariffs. And the way you can see this, I think, if you look at this policy is by far the most effective if nobody ever pays the tariffs. And I say two policies, right? So if you look at the trade deficit emergency, if nobody ever pays the tariffs and instead Americans direct their consumption towards American producers and stimulate the rebuilding of our hollowed out manufacturing base, then the policy is by far the most effective.
Did you catch all that? Now, put aside everything that was said there. Okay? Put all of that aside because I think we all fall into the same trap. And the media falls into this trap. And when you look up articles on what's happening and you try and find out and keep up to date on what's happening in the Supreme Court, what are the arguments, what is going to be the ruling, we all fall into the trap of thinking that these people live in reality, that they're actually a court that's trying to uphold the law. All right? That's not the case. I'm just sorry to say that the United States now is living in an alternate reality. And the Supreme Court is not there to uphold the law. The Supreme Court is just a vehicle that's used in the United States by the party that has appointed the most judges to basically do what that party wants. And in the case that we're in right now, there are more Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices than Democrat-appointed Supreme Court justices. So their job is to promote the ideology of the Republican Party now. They will hold these sessions and they will hear these arguments and have these discussions, which I have to point out, any rational person would characterize them as insane and ridiculously stupid. Here we have a person, a lawyer having a conversation with a Supreme Court judge, and they're debating between the two of them on whether a U.S. tax is paid by U.S. citizens. They're actually discussing this. They have wandered so far into a world of unreality that these grown-ups, these people with power, the ultimate power in the United States, they're actually discussing this. This tax that the U.S. government has imposed on imports that are paid by Americans, are those really paid by Americans? Let's discuss this now for a few hours, and then we Supreme Court justices will think about it till next June and let you know what we think. Maybe you'll be able to convince me that really Americans aren't paying. Then you read other articles like this one on CTV News. Trump has options if the Supreme Court blocks him from imposing emergency tariffs. Oh, I guess there's different categories of tariffs. These ones are emergency tariffs. Trump imposed his tariffs using the IEEPA law, but Trump might turn to Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930, which allows the president to hit countries with tariffs of up to 50% if they're treating imports from other countries more favorably than products from the United States. Section 338 has never been used by a president before. Trump also might look at Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, which allows the president to take trade action if an investigation finds a trading partner's policies are unreasonable and discriminatory. But that law requires country-by-country investigations of trade policy before the tariff can be imposed. Oh, I'm sure Donald Trump can launch an investigation which will find that the whole world is being unreasonable and discriminatory against the U.S., and that'll give him power to impose tariffs. And by the way, the Supreme Court's decision will not affect Trump's expanding use of tariffs under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. We haven't mentioned that one yet. Tariffs that are already hammering Canada's steel, aluminum, automobile, lumber, and copper industries. The Supreme Court decision won't affect those. And by the way, Trump has already indicated he plans to target more industries using this particular law. Let me continue the discussion here with this pic posted by Charismo in the I Choose Canada group. So if you step back and detach yourself from the media and reading these articles and having these opinions that, well, the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court rules against Trump, it's illegal, he'll have to drop the tariffs and everything will be okay. And these ideas that something is actually going to happen. Let me try and describe it this way. Canadians, we need to get our heads out of our asses. Nothing's going to happen. As long as Donald Trump is the president, there will be tariffs. The Supreme Court, whether it rules one way or the other, or whether it doesn't rule at all, whether it just comes out with a statement that sends the decision back to another court, that's a possibility as well. Remember the history of the Supreme Court since Donald Trump has taken office. They've actually ruled that the President of the United States is immune from prosecution for anything he does. And that same lawyer that I played the clip for you that we just listened to, he was the same lawyer that was arguing that the president would have the right to order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political opponent under certain circumstances, and whether there was a vote in Congress or whether he approached it in a certain way. He actually convinced the Supreme Court. Well, he didn't really convince them. Like I said, the Supreme Court just works for Donald Trump now. The judges that were appointed by Republicans voted yes, the president should have complete immunity for anything that he does. And the judges that were appointed by Democrats voted no. That's how it works. There is no rule of law in the United States. And the Supreme Court's job isn't to hear cases to enforce the rule of law. That's not how it works. For example, if you're in the United States and you're walking down the street, more likely if your skin is brown in color, but it could happen to anyone. If you're walking down the street and someone dressed in camouflage gear, wearing a mask with a gun, could come up to you, grab you, throw you on the ground, kneel on your back, and tie your hands behind your back. And if you should happen to struggle while you do this and maybe make contact with him with your arm, that person can put you into the back of a van and take you to a warehouse where you'll be detained and charged with resisting arrest. And if you had done nothing wrong up till then, if you were in the United States legally, if you were even a U.S. citizen, but you did make contact with the person wearing camouflage while he was trying to throw you onto the floor and tie your hands behind your back, You could go up in front of a judge who, if it happens to be a Republican judge, could find you guilty with resisting arrest or possibly assault, and you could go to jail. And that whole process could take 2 or 3 days. And that would be described by Americans as law and order. Now, another example, if you're the most powerful person in the United States and you happen to be the president, first of all, you will be immune from anything that you do, whether it's legal or illegal. So if you do something that's obviously wrong, for instance, accusing Canada of being a national security threat to your country because of the flow of fentanyl across the border, a notion that's completely ridiculous, even if you use United States statistics, which shows that almost all of the fentanyl that enters the United States comes from Mexico or China, and a fraction, less than 1%, comes from Canada. And not to mention that it's a bigger problem for Canada trying to stop the flow of illegal US guns coming into our country. It's actually the United States that poses the security threat to Canada. Despite that, if you're the president and you launch a trade war using misinformation, and you actually use a law, the IEEPA, that doesn't even stipulate that you can use tariffs, if you do something illegal, then what happens is you get to do what's illegal and you get to carry on doing that for years and years and years, while a lot of men and women wearing suits can meet in this big room and have these ridiculous discussions back and forth. Well, I went to Tim Hortons today and I bought a coffee. It cost $2, and on my bill it says $2, and then it said 5% GST, an extra 10 cents. But that is not actually a tax that's paid by Canadians. It's not really a tax. It can be presumed as an incentive for Canadians to consume more locally brewed flavors of coffee, depending on which countries are importing them or exporting them. And the exporting countries of the beans may choose to absorb some of the costs before it's brewed in Canada, and therefore the 10 cents could just be viewed as a transfer back from the consumer to the seller, and the seller could be a Canadian company or perhaps a foreign entity that has shareholders within Canada, in which case the 10 cents could be viewed as a shareholder incentive for the purchase of that product. And on and on and on and on, and we, the sheep, have to walk around swimming in this sea of BS, pumped to us by the media when they post these articles of this is what the Supreme Court could rule and this is what the administration must do if they rule that. It's all just a sea, a big cloud of BS. Regardless of what the Supreme Court rules, there will be another move that the administration will make. Even if the Supreme Court rules against the president and says these tariffs are illegal, the tariffs that you imposed using the IEEPA law are illegal. Within 15 minutes, the administration will just pivot and use another statute or come up with a counter argument to maintain the tariffs. And if you're a member of the government in the United States, you'll also describe this as the rule of law. So the point I'm trying to make here is this. Just forget about the United States Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court doesn't give a shit about Canada. The U.S. Supreme Court is not going to save Canada. The only people that are going to save Canada is us. Me, you, and all other Canadians. And we're going to save Canada. I shouldn't even use that word. It's not saving Canada. We're going to choose Canada. That's what we're going to do. We're going to buy Canadian. We're going to support local businesses. We're going to decide with our wallets to spend our money in our country. We're going to continue to go on holiday in our country. If you need to take a break because the snow's going to pile up a little bit higher than it is in this picture here. And I know a lot of Canadians, they need to take a break and they need a little sunshine. Me included. I like to get away for a week or two in the middle of the winter on a nice warm holiday. I will not be going to the United States. I will be going to Mexico if I go anywhere, but I'm going to choose Canada in all my other purchases. Fuck the U.S. Supreme Court. The only thing I care about is Canadians and my country, and I'm going to choose Canada in every decision I make. That's what will support us and get us through this, no matter what the Supreme Court rules or what happens with these tariffs going forward. And I'll point out, this is going to scare a lot of you, but I've already done a video on this. 2026, in my opinion, is not going to get better. In 2026, that's when the USMCA, CUSMA, is up for renegotiation. And I fully expect that the U.S. administration, led by Donald Trump, is going to use that as an excuse, saying, well, the deal's up for renegotiation. I'm the president. I'm immune. I can do whatever I want. I'm not going to follow the deal now because we're going to renegotiate it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see many, many more tariffs added onto sectors that are not tariffed right now, that are protected. Most of the trade we have with the United States is protected by CUSMA. The only thing that will stop Donald Trump is a market meltdown. If the US stock market collapses, or if the US economic numbers are so bad that Trump simply can't lie anymore. He can't just say, well, the US is the hottest country in the world. There's 12, 15, 17, 20 trillion dollars that's coming in. There's jobs and factories being opened everywhere. If he simply can't keep lying because the numbers are so bad, then he'll just claim victory. He'll say, well, the tariffs worked. We raised all this money. We went through the hard part for a year, and now it's time to make America great again. My plan was a huge success, and I'm going to send everyone a $2,000 check because we're so rich now. I did such a great job that everyone in the U.S. gets a $2,000 check. Right before the midterms, I'm going to mail those checks out. And he won't get congressional approval to mail the checks out. And then the U.S. Supreme Court can argue about it for about 3 years. Does the president really have the power to send out money without congressional approval? Let's hear arguments on this. Like I've said many times, the only people that are going to help Canada are me and you and all other Canadians. We need to just choose Canada in all the decisions that we make. Every purchase we make, every decision we make when we go and spend our money, we have to choose Canada. I will not support a country who's hostile to my own country. I'm going to choose Canada, and I hope all of you do as well. Speaking of which, it's arrived. My I Choose Canada Fall Edition shirt has arrived, and I guess we're going to have to come up with a winter version because the snow's already flying. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel. I would appreciate it to help keep the channel growing. If you want to support my work on a monthly basis, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. Have a fantastic rest of your day, everyone, and I will catch you all on the next one.
And the statute doesn't use the word tariffs.
But it uses the word regulate importation. And historically, a core central application of that, a big piece of that, has always been to tariff. If you had asked the founders, how do you regulate imports? They would say, of course, we tariff. That's what we do. So it'd be very unusual to say, we're giving you power to regulate importation and say, but you cannot impose regulatory tariffs. That'd be almost a contradiction. And all the historical sources we cite in our brief, relate to that particular historical pedigree. And as I was referring to earlier, there's a specific pedigree of regulated importation here in the specific context of the presidents Polk and Lincoln and President McKinley asserting the authority to impose tariffs in wartime. That was then codified in TWIA and then recodified for peacetime in TWIA in 1933 and then carried over into IEPA. So there's that as well. But more importantly, if you look at the sort of triggering conditions that members of this court have identified for the major questions doctrine, there's a series of them, and we think they really do, all of them don't apply here. For example, the notion that the power is unheralded. You refer to the fact that IEPA has never been asserted to invoke tariffs, but of course, the immediately predecessor statute, the tariffs that President Nixon imposed on that were upheld under this very language. So this, I would say this is, and it was recodified in IEPA 2 years later. So this is kind of the opposite of unheralded power. It's also heralded because there's this long-standing delegation, a tradition of very broad delegations of the foreign commerce power going back to the founding.